The head of the International Rescue Committee, David Miliband, has said the UK should be more ambitious with international aid and do so without hubris about its global role. With us now to talk about it is former Conservative International Development Secretary, Rory Stewart. Hi, it's good to see you.
Very good to see you.
We're not doing enough.
We're not doing enough. The world is in a very horrible situation. The number of people in extreme poverty in the world is at about 700 million people. And the number of people in extreme poverty in Africa has gone from about 170 million in 1980 to about 430 million today.
What more can we do? What should we be doing?
Well, one thing is to innovate. And one of the things we've discovered, which is very, very difficult for people to accept, is that often giving cash is the most useful, efficient way of helping people. We waste an incredible amount of money designing programs, teaching people to do things, when often if we get out of the way and give cash, which feels very risky, the results are extraordinary.
How do you avoid corruption?
It's difficult to avoid corruption, but there's corruption in everything, sadly, in international aid. There'll be corruption in delivering wheat, there'll be corruption in delivering training programs. But studies on cash show that individuals have very different needs, house by house. So you may want to open a bakery, I may want to get my children into school. Cash allows you to do that. And of course, because I've given you the money, you're likely to spend it much more efficiently than some international expert coming in and spending it for you.
So how does that work? I mean, do you just have some bloke in the town square handing out buckets full of money?
Not anymore. I mean, nowadays, increasingly, mobile money's used. So even the very poor in Africa now can have access to a $7 or $8 phone, and the money can be transferred onto an account on their phone. And they use that phone to buy things and to get the cash. And one of the extraordinary things I remember seeing, my first big program in Rwanda, is just how quickly things change. Within a couple of months, you suddenly see roofs being repaired, more children in school, businesses growing up. And it's falling almost like water on a mountain landscape in the sense that it's filling every crevice in a very flexible way.
Many countries, though, don't necessarily have access to electronic banking systems, do they? So how do you make that work?
Well, that's changed a lot in Africa. So you're right that traditionally that wouldn't be true, but increasingly Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, Malawi, people can use mobile banking on their phones, and it means if you're somebody, it's safer than carrying around cash.
Countries like, areas like Darfur, countries like Darfur, are an area that was very popular with celebrities to have the spotlight in Darfur 20 years ago. Yeah. They're in dire straits again. What needs to happen to try to shine a light on countries like that?
Well, we need to develop a sense of hope. I mean, you can understand that taxpayers and others get exhausted because they have a sense in Sudan, as you say, that we were doing a lot 20 years ago and we're having to do a lot now. But in the end, this comes down to humans, comes down to children, comes down to millions of displaced people, people starving, and remembering that £1 for us is worth almost £100 for somebody in that kind of position. That what for us might be a cup of coffee, for them is literally the difference between eating or not eating.
British government not doing enough?
British government isn't doing enough, sadly. We were a global leader in this, but increasingly we and many other European countries have reduced the amount that we give in international development, and we're not spending it very efficiently. There's enough money out there. I mean, the money that the world spends on international development put into cash would probably be able to lift almost everybody in extreme poverty out of poverty. That's not to say the cash is the answer to everything. You still need roads, you still need schools, but all the evidence now shows that we're wasting so much. When I was...
How's it wasted?
Wasted on consultants, wasted on strategy papers, wasted on monitoring and evaluation. I mean, I saw programs where $40,000 would be spent and only about $2,000 or $3,000 would hit the ground. And a lot of it was spent on reassuring ourselves, checking, monitoring, designing logical frameworks, strategic plans, and end up buying a few red plastic buckets and putting a couple of holes in the ground. So that's one of the reasons I believe in cash. I mean, however much might be wasted or lost by giving people cash, it's nothing compared to the amount that we waste with our bureaucracies.
How do people help?
So you could send money individually. So I and many other people around the world send £30 a month, and that goes directly in cash to people in extreme poverty. If you're a billionaire philanthropist like Bill Gates, you could give much more. You could be encouraging governments to be more open to cash. I mean, remember, cash is something we have in our own countries. When we look at supporting people in poverty in Britain, we've learnt that often it's more efficient to actually give people cash and let them fix their own needs rather than creating a huge government bureaucracy trying to do it for them.
What do you think of the political system in this country at the moment?
Well, I think pretty depressing, because I think we find it difficult to be honest. I mean, if we look at the problems in the water system in Britain at the moment, obviously our sewage system's in trouble, our drinking water's in trouble, our rivers are in problems. But why? Well, fundamentally, because politicians aren't honest about how much it would cost to fix it. We're trying to keep bills down. Same's true with the NHS. You just had a report today. It's going to cost a lot of money to sort out the NHS, and yet the new government's come in saying it's not going to raise taxes. And I'm afraid...
Do you believe them?
Do I believe they're not going to raise it? I think, sadly, they probably won't. I'd like them to raise taxes because I think our public services are in bits, and we can't have world-class public services if we're not prepared to pay for them.
Do you think the NHS can survive in its present form?
I think it's going to be very tough. I mean, this report that you've just seen from Lord Darcy shows that we're at least £35 billion a year short of keeping up. And every year we live longer, drugs cost more. It's much more than inflation, the rise in the cost of healthcare, and we're simply not putting the money into facing it. So either we need to get away from a free model, or we need to pay more tax. What we can't do is continue this fantasy world of being angry that we have poor healthcare, poor education, poor transport and services, and not producing the money to fix it.
I was hearing some startling numbers suggested 40% of our budget is spent on the NHS. That's not sustainable.
Correct. 40% of our current expenditure, yeah. And that'd probably be going up to nearly 50% of the daily expenditure of the government. It is a system that doesn't exist anywhere in the world, and I'm afraid it doesn't feel as though it can be kept going on the current model unless people are prepared to pay much more tax, which they're not.
So how do we fix that? Is it privatisation of some parts of the NHS?
There are different models around the world, good models in Australia, good models in France. Of course, they're difficult to get to, but insurance models have worked well in some parts of the world. Some minimal contributions, so some countries would say that you pay, say, £4 or £5 to go and visit a GP, helps to take some of the burden off, deals with the fact that there are many, many missed appointments. Some people think as many as 100 million missed appointments going on, which of course is completely inefficient for the system. But these are very uncomfortable. I mean, you know, I'm no longer a serving politician. If I was to say this as a serving politician, I'd be on the front page of the newspaper. My career would be over, suggesting that we're having trouble funding this. But the truth of the matter is this, that drugs are more expensive, we're getting older and older, and as we get older, we cost more and more to look after. And that's before we get on to adult social care, dementia, Alzheimer's, and all the costs we're facing. So I'm afraid at some point, looking seriously at countries that deliver world-class care, and I believe Australia, France are doing very well, and understanding they have a different model.
Any temptation to return to frontline politics?
Yes, often tempted, but it's a pretty horrible job, Kay. So along with the temptation is a realisation that it's pretty brutal and thankless at the moment, and creating the space for an honest conversation will be part of that. And that's why, just to return to where we began, even saying what I'm saying in international development, which is actually we're wasting often 80-90% of our money and we should just be giving cash, even that you can see the newspapers getting pretty angry at one with, even when the evidence is very good.
Democracy in Action we saw at the beginning of July, and the rise of Reform. Got a thought on that?
Well, very striking. So Reform's getting 14-15% of the vote. And of course, in Germany, the AfD, which is a far-right party, much more extreme than Reform, took 33% of the vote in the local elections. Yeah. Mm. And there you see a party getting almost as many votes as Labour got in percentage terms in the British election. At the core of this is immigration. If parties to the centre cannot demonstrate that they have control over immigration, that they're able to be compassionate but also practical and tough, we're going to see an increasing rise of the right.
Okay. It's good to see you as always. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot.